I will ask Tatiana to please give us some words regarding the theme.
Thank you very much. I might have a bit of unconventional opinion because even when I look at the title of the session, it gives me stomach cramps. Because I think that we have to get rid of this concept of the balancing. We have to get rid of this concept of privacy versus security. We get to get rid of the concept to where we just put them and like antagonize them. I don't think that by securing networks or by providing cybersecurity, we are securing, you know, some random devices or random technologies or equipment or networks or infrastructure, whatever. The main focus of security should be people, should be humans. This is why we care about cybersecurity. This is why we want anything from this phone to critical infrastructure to be secure, because we are protecting human beings. And I think that when we think about this from this perspective, when we think from human-centric approach, privacy becomes an integral part of cybersecurity. And this is why I think we have to shift these concepts completely. We have to get rid in our language and in our concepts these antagonizing things. We have to stop putting them apart. And we have to think about, start thinking about cybersecurity as about privacy as integral part of cybersecurity. We have to shift these approaches to human-centric approach to cybersecurity. And then it will become much easier, you know. Then any policy making, any law drafting, anything will become easier when we think about privacy as integral part of security, cybersecurity, and so on. And I don't have time to go into details here, like how we can do this and whatever, but just if you are interested in anything like this, I know that Freedom Online Coalition Working Group 1, for example, it's a kind of multi-stakeholder group where governments are working together with civil society to create some paradigm shifts, and I know that they issued some principles on human rights-centric approach to cybersecurity. They didn't go there as, you know, far and violent as I went with my statement about getting rid even language-wise, but I think that these principles are already endorsed by governments like US, Canada, and so on, by civil society organizations. So they do have some, you know, outlying principles of how we can possibly do this. So this is my intervention. I think we have to stop balancing and we have to bring them together. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Yes, I think we should discuss the balance between privacy and security. They are in the same time, at the same, every moment, we cannot take them apart. Yes, thank you for your remarks. Then I will invite Kai for his remarks, please.
Yeah, I can 100% support what Tatiana was mentioning before. I would even mention it more dramatically. For me, digital privacy is really a human right. Honestly speaking, I don't understand why we separate, let's say, the digital world from the analog world. In an analog world, if someone will enter your house, in some countries you can even shoot that person. In a digital world, we have completely lost control of our data. We have no clue what's gathered about us. We have no clue what's happening with the data, and we have no clue to how to really revoke that information. And also, like in this workshop, we're talking about balancing between openness and security and privacy. Honestly, the first step for me would be, what is openness? Because for many institutions, openness means, okay, I get all the data, I gather all the information which I can get from my customers. That's openness. For governments, they gather all the information they get about their people and use this in their interest. It's not in the interest of the individual. And this is something which we need to change. And as I was mentioning in my intro, I founded a company a couple of years ago focusing on data privacy topics, because I feel a bit guilty, because in the 90s I was working for a huge consulting company convincing the big enterprises to gather more information about their customers and using this to sell better products and so on. And after a couple of years, I realized it's getting more and more out of control, and that's where we are, and that's where we need to change something. And one thing I spotted, I'm a technology guy, and one thing I spotted is that looking at our technologies, we're still like in the medieval times, because all we have in regard to data protection is like a couple of hundred years ago, when we basically built big walls around the cities to protect the cities. That concept had a little problem that if someone wants to trade something or communicate with others, they need to open the door to let someone in. And basically, we have the same problem with our data at the moment, because even when we talk about encryption, which is the key standard at the moment, we need to remove the encryption when someone wants to use the data. So I currently cannot control the data because I need to remove the encryption, and then I have no idea what's happening to my data. That's the reason why we need to change something. Another metaphor in regard to the security problem is that when we talk about authentication, we're still like in the medieval times, because a couple of 100 years ago, you need to show your passport to be entering the city. That's exactly what we're doing now, because the access control is you're providing your username, you're providing your passport or other information, and at the end you're in. And this needs to be changed. And this is basically what I'm working on. We provide solutions which are changing the way how we interact and how we handle our data, because really privacy needs to be integral part of the data. That's the only way how we can protect this. That's the only way how we will be able to control what's happening to our data, and it's the only way how to be able to revoke data at the end, because only if it's part of the information itself you're able to control it, and therefore we need a paradigm shift, and that's what we're working on.
Thank you, Kai. I apologize, the transcript has stopped, so if anybody knows what to do. Yes, but it's for all, so if anyone here knows what to do, it will be appreciated. I think you're bringing a good point into this about human rights. Yes, the right for privacy and the right for being secure. And we all of us, we are sure that they're only a set of human rights, not separated, so hence it reinforces Tatiana's point of view. Thank you. So then I will ask Duncan for your remarks, please.
Thank you very much. I think you can probably guess from my opening remarks that I represent not a different viewpoint, but a diversity of viewpoints coming from the technical community of the internet. I'm interested, for those in the audience who know about internet registries. So, okay, good. I won't go into too much detail. APNIC is one of the 5 internet registries around the world providing IP address space. Here in Europe, the registry is called RIPE, based in Amsterdam. There's one in Latin America, Africa, and the US. And we are part of the technical community, as we like to call them, names, numbers, and standards. So we are the numbers providing the connectivity, the IP address space. The names are handled by ICANN, which I think many of you would know, and the standards are developed by the Internet Engineering Task Force, a very important body which sits at the back of the Internet's infrastructure developing the standards. One of the interesting things I find about the IETF is it does not exist as an organisation. It's a voluntary group of engineers that meets at least twice a year developing all the standards that allow the Internet's infrastructure to operate. But from my community's point of view, we're a non-profit membership organisation. All of the registries are non-profit, and if you're a service provider providing connectivity, a mobile operator, you will come to us, request address space for your customers and your devices. This is how your customers will connect, through the Internet Protocol, the IP address space. So we have around 15,000 members in the 56 economies of the Asia Pacific. And these are all of the companies and firms providing the connectivity to everybody around the region. As a membership organisation, APNIC is essentially acting like a secretariat. So we have open and transparent election processes that appoint a board for our organisation that's elected from right across the whole region. And all of the registries around the world operate on the same basis. So we're very open, we're very technical. We don't generally discuss the issues that you're looking at today. However, we are very interested, and it's why we come to the IGF, to be engaged and involved in the discussions, because how the infrastructure operates and how it's managed and the policies that govern the infrastructure that we talk about today is a key thing for us. Our policy process, for example, is completely open and transparent. Any one of you could come at any time to our meeting twice a year and propose a policy impacting or affecting the allocation of address space in the Asia-Pacific. It's an open process. And all of it is online, and you can see how it's allocated and how the decisions are made. It's a very technical process, so some would say there's a very high barrier of entry into the process because of its technicality, but it is still very open, and this is one of the things that we certainly want to convey to the community here at the IGF. In terms of the membership and the other communities that we engage with for this morning's discussion, I've already mentioned the internet service providers around the region that we connect with. Our natural community are network engineers. That some of them are involved in internet governance discussions, but many of them are technical people that don't directly engage in these sort of discussions. The second community that we engage with are the CERT community, the community emergency response teams that exist within government infrastructure and large network providers. And the third community, which I think starts to get much more into what we're talking about this morning, is we engage with law enforcement. And we engage with law enforcement right around the region, but globally as well, such as Interpol, the FBI, even in the US, in several areas. One is in training to ensure that law enforcement agencies understand who we are and what we do and the role we play and what is an IP address. And when they're looking to identify some behaviour on the internet, that they understand where that IP address that they're using to identify people comes from and how it's managed, and it's not owned by a government, that it's an international public good. That's one area. So education and training is a key part of what we do with law enforcement and government justice officials. The other area is law enforcement has an interest in our policy process. Just to get a little bit technical for a couple of minutes, for those of you who know us, you'll know one of our central technical issues is a technology called IPv4. If you know IPv4, it's Internet Protocol version 4. This was the address space decided on in the 1990s, around 2 billion addresses globally for the world. We have run out of IPv4. We are now moving to what we call IPv6, which we are assured we will never run out of. For those of you who like numbers, IPv4 was around 2 to the power of 32. IPv6 is 2 to the power of 64, I think. So billions and billions of addresses. What that means is, with IPv4 and the networks that you're operating on now, one device can be sharing an address with 10 other devices. So from a law enforcement point of view, it can be very difficult under the IPv4 network infrastructure to identify users. Think of the old PABX in your office, where you have one line and a PABX coming into your office going to 10 phones around the office. That's what many network operators are using now. They have one address and they're sharing it with 10 or 15 users. Under IPv6, because we have billions of addresses, every device, every individual will have its own unique address. This is not permanent, it's a dynamic situation, so as you log on every day, you'll have a different address for your device, but it will mean every device has its own unique address. And so the implications of this is something we perhaps can discuss in a little more detail this morning. I think finally, I just want to emphasise our interest in collaboration. Even though we're very technical, a discussion like we're having this morning is of great interest to us because we feel it can lead to discussions around regulation that can directly impact on our community, and that is something we're very interested in. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Duncan. I'm sure, as part as well from the technical community, that in terms of security, cybersecurity, we should start bringing a unique community, yes, with different point of views. Again, we cannot split privacy from security. We cannot split in this theme technical from social, from law enforcement. Yes, and we together have to build knowledge. Yes, so I will pass the floor to Michael, and we will hear his remarks.
Thank you. So first of all, before I even begin saying anything, how many people here are with law enforcement? Are there any representatives from law enforcement here? Kind of one? See, this is exactly this is the problem, because the more that I don't necessarily know the entire makeout of the room, but the fact is, if most people here are within civil society, this is not going to necessarily accomplish anything. Nobody came here to be lectured to. The fact is that we have to be talking to each other. We have to be those that are in favor or care about privacy, those that are passionate about privacy, and those that are passionate about security for various reasons. If we're not talking to each other, we're not really ever going to accomplish much. Now, the fact is that security and privacy and openness at the same time, they are not black and white. We need both. We can't have a robust and a lively and vivid cyberspace unless we have both the privacy of our data, the privacy of users, but at the same time we have security in our networks and security to browse the internet, however within within law, and we are exercising our right to be a part of it, but at the same time safe. Now, kind of my take on this, and I want to come out of the gate a little bit more contentious, is that I wrote this the other day. I said any party that frames the relationship between privacy and security as mutually exclusive and somewhat as unwinnable as one or the other, frankly, that's lazy. I think that's really lazy. It doesn't accomplish anything. But what's harder is building trust. Building trust between the private sector and intermediaries, building trust between cybersecurity firms and law enforcement officials, and then building trust within that with civil society, privacy advocates, etc. If we want to accomplish anything, if we ever want to get to this point where we're really more understanding of each other's perspectives, we're really understanding more of this, of how we can have security and privacy. They have to coexist. They can't be one or the other. It can't be that way. If we want to have that, we have to learn how to trust each other. We have to learn how to be open with one another, to have conversations, hard-hitting. You know, we need to be able to say, absolutely, law enforcement, you're right. We need to do something against child porn. We have to be able to do that. At the same time, privacy advocates who say that, well, you know, they're absolutely right that they shouldn't have, private citizens shouldn't have all of their data mass surveilled. You know, but the fact is there are solutions. It takes work, it takes creativity, and it takes trust in all of the parties between them in order to accomplish that. And then lastly, it takes transparency. And I think, and that's a huge part of the trust building process. How can we trust each other if on one hand I'm saying this, but on the other hand I'm going to different fora or different events and then doing the exact opposite? Or if I'm going into my government, let's say, or if I'm going into my civil society group and I'm trying to undermine the process. Basically, this is how I hope to also encourage this discussion, to say, how do we build trust? How do we encourage transparency? And how do we reach those stakeholders that, regardless of whether they're in the room or not, how do we build those connections so that we can really take this debate into real policy and into real implications for our security for our security, for our networks and our protocols? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think you have this point on trust, and from the Internet Society, that is one of the 4 pillars of the Internet, the trust that will create in us a sense of security, of privacy. I will make it just before opening the floor to all the participants, to all the delegates, this analogy. As children, we were taught that going to the toilet was dangerous. There was dangerous stuff in there. But also it was a private environment. And we cannot separate privacy from security in that area in the house. So how do we learn that? How do we exercise both things as security and privacy? Maybe it's something we have to reflect and talk, which is fundamental to speak amongst us, technical, social, law enforcement, so we can build knowledge together. So now I will open the floor to the delegates. First.
Thanks a lot for giving me the floor. My name is Gamal. I work on the permanent mission of Egypt here in Geneva. Just a quick remark. I decided to attend some of the sessions that are related to cybersecurity due to the humble experience I had by participating in the group of governmental experts that were established by the Secretary General of the United Nations on cybersecurity. And the first remark I noticed about the kind of deliberation discussions we are having here is that when we tackle security, we tackle it a little bit from a national and domestic perspective, while we are still lacking the international aspect of the issue. And this is, I guess, goes to the question that was raised by the distinguished panelist here about the lack of the presence or the participation of all the necessary stakeholders in order to have some sort of a comprehensive or a holistic approach. So this is the general remark I would like to share. The second point I would like to tackle was raised by Duncan here, and I had an interesting discussion with him before the starting of this session. The problem of sharing the IP addresses, in my perception, is related somehow to the problem of attribution, and this is one of the issues that we addressed in the work of the GGE on cybersecurity, because some member states tried to somehow to implement the right of self-defense using Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, if there is some sort of a cyber attack against what they call the critical infrastructure. So the difficulty of attribution will somehow lead to the misuse or the abuse of the right of self-defense if there is somehow an attack from, for example, a non-state actor within a specific state, the territory of a specific state, against the critical infrastructure of another state. And this goes to another issue as well, which is the definitional problem. What do we mean by cyber attack? What do we mean by cyber war? What do we mean by cyber war, crime? So I just decided to intervene to raise all these issues from a little bit different perspective, which is the international perspective, and I'm glad to hear any specific points or reaction to the point I raised right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll make a first round and then we make comments. I also will invite people on the following this session through remotely to participate. So please.
One issue that was not raised in the discussion was about data literacy. So we have people who don't realize what data is, what privacy means, and how they should feel about that. For example, we are offering internet connectivity to remote villages. People are really happy to just have internet access. They're really happy. But when you go about talking to them about internet data privacy, they don't realize what that is. And it takes a lot of effort to educate, to train these people, and in turn, to lead these people to vote for politicians who understand what data privacy is and who understand all the technicalities and the implications of data privacy. Because we also have politicians who do not understand what the discussion is all about. They go about voting for stuff that they don't understand. So this is a really big issue.
Thank you. Anyone wanting the floor? Yes, do you want to use the... Sorry, you cannot move it.
Yes. No. Hi, so my name is Arnaud Tadei. I'm a director for the CTO.
Closer. Oh, sorry.
Right, sorry for So my name is Arnaud Tadei. I am a director for the CTO of Symantec, the #1 cybersecurity company. I'm as well chairman at Working Party 3 on Study Group 17 in the ITU. Right. So I heard the debate so far, and I have to ask a question regarding the problem of interception. Right. The problem we have with interception and how to reconcile both the law enforcement guys and the privacy guys is that, unfortunately, there is one interception that wants to be invisible, and there is one interception that accepts and wants to promote to be visible. So when we try to defend, for example, consumers or enterprise customers, we would like them to understand that there is a party in the line, whether on the endpoint, on the network, or on the cloud. However, when I'm a government trying to find if you are a bad guy, I don't want you to know about it. And this distinction between the two categories of interception makes both of them quite irreconcilable precisely at the moment with what is being developed at the IETF. So, for a reminder, in the past, when 20 years ago email arrived and nobody knew what to do from a lawful interception part, when people started to implement interception, they did not have to hack anything. They did not have to find any zero-day. They just used the protocols as they were. They just used the products as they were. They made clean design that were auditable, and off we go. And today, that's how we do email interception. However, for a bizarre reason of history, anything on the web and HTTP was not put under lawful interception. Whether good, bad, and ugly, that doesn't matter. But today, the problem is that HTTP is not interceptable and less interceptable. So when you are on lawful interception, that's a problem that led, for example, Germany to issue the Bundestrojan law back in June, which basically allows them to attack their citizens with a zero-day on their endpoint to intercept the over-the-top communication. Right, so if you push in one direction, it's like in physics. Action means reaction. Of course, imagine the German people having to explain their government, which is the champion on privacy, and their engineers, which are the champions of good design, that they have to rely on 0 days, and they have to do an attack on their customer, on their citizens. Very interesting situation. Now, on the side of the enterprise customers, the possibilities to intercept decrease one by one. Right? So that means if we want to defend the people, I'm not talking lawful interception, but just defend enterprise customers in terms of where they are today, is going to become more and more difficult. Just even to debug your data center is going to be difficult. So indeed, we need to find a compromise, but I'm asking here, can we, at the moment, find a compromise between the two communities? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, just before passing you, is there any remote? No? Okay. Okay, so I will ask Tatiana for starting, and anyone from the panel to dialogue with these remarks.
Thank you very much. I also want to take this time because I will have to run away to another session. I want to address law enforcement and interception issue, first of all. I might be voicing an unpopular opinion here because I'm the one who is working closely with law enforcement agencies on amending the interception law and making legal mutual assistance in interception possible in European countries. And first I would like to address Michael's point about law enforcement agencies not being present here. I don't think that it has a lot to deal with cybersecurity, privacy, and whatever. They intervene when cybersecurity measures already failed. And their attitude is like, I have a criminal, I have a drug trafficker, I have a cyber criminal, I have a child abused or whatever. And this is very emotional attitude of them, you know. You're talking about securing your network's privacy and whatever, I have to solve my case. And the second dimension or pillar of this is that we have to understand that interception or any other type of data acquisition will be very different for law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies. And law enforcement agencies are very heavily regulated by criminal law with many procedures and safeguards. In most of the countries in Europe, for example, and not only in Europe, in the world, for a law enforcement officer to intercept, to investigate crime, they have to go to the court, they have to obtain a court order. So they are saying, why are you looking at us like we are violating your privacy? We have to go to the court every time when we need data. And most of the time we cannot even acquire them because they are encrypted. What more do you want from us? And this is why many privacy advocates do not even want to listen to this. They do not want to make this distinction between law enforcement, which is doing targeted surveillance, and intelligence agencies which have possibility to do mass surveillance. Many of us don't even want to work in law enforcement shoes because, they have so many safeguards. And if you think that they don't care about privacy, it means that they don't care about privacy. Our judicial system doesn't care about privacy. Our legal system doesn't care about privacy in criminal investigations. And then the whole pyramid fails, and what are we going to do to make another one? Now back to the interception. Back to my point about law enforcement. For law enforcement to intercept your phone in most of the countries, they have to go to the prosecutor, they have to go to the court, they have to obtain the warrant, and still, in many cases you cannot intercept email and transmission. Even if email is stored, if the same procedure, go obtain a warrant, go to provider. So there are many safeguards, you cannot do it simply. Concerning the Bundestrojan, 2 dimensions of Bundestrojan again. For law enforcement, this norm exists. I don't like the German one, okay? I think it wasn't well balanced. I think that was pre-election compromise. But let's not talk politics. Let's talk countries who really have these provisions. Spain, France, from what I know. You put the zero-day exploit and you extract the data. In France, look in France, to intercept communication or email, the crime has to have no less than 3 years of prison punishment. For Trojan thing, it's a heavy crime, aggravated crime, no less than 7 years. You have to have senior prosecutor to participate in this process. You have it to be approved by judge. Technically, there might be a flaw, but legally, there are enough safeguards. Stop bashing law enforcement. Start trusting in your law enforcement. Or do something with your law enforcement, do something with your government. It's not about interception. But intelligence, yes, but stop mixing them. Otherwise, law enforcement will never come to this room. And my last point, because I really have to run away, I'm sorry, about the state right to self-defense and GGE. I do believe that this is one international perspective. And I do believe that we shouldn't work in silos, right? But when we are talking about cybersecurity, this debate is getting all over, So I don't really, I do understand that norm-making and GGE debate has a lot of importance, but it is a bit different from debate about privacy, because when it comes to privacy, it will go to the national level. We can do a lot internationally in terms of how we transfer data and so on, how we protect critical infrastructure and transfer data abroad, but getting it to the level of GGE is a bit too much for me. It's just, it's too far from what we're talking about. Thank you.
Please. Tanya, quickly, just before you go, I just want to be very clear that, and I hope in my opening remarks, I wasn't criticizing law enforcement for not being here. I meant that they have to be a part of the conversation, and I think villainizing. Sorry,
Michael, I think that they don't owe us anything except investigating crime with all the privacy safeguards. And they don't have to be here. They're doing their job. We have to make them interested to come here. And this is where I feel like I personally fail. I'm failing to bring them to the IGF. I'm meeting them at so many premises and we talk a lot, but it's like the general concept is, guys, I don't have time to sit in this room with you and discuss how bad surveillance is when I'm not doing surveillance, you know what I mean? That's it.
Well, I will add something for the discussion before you leave. I think we should stop seeing cybersecurity or security in any way as a hierarchical process. We should look at it as an ecosystem. Yes, everything is closely related and is growing organic. That we should look at that. And also another point is when usually there is a complaint about some crime, some need of information, whatever the reason is, usually the guy that attends that is an engineer who is far away from the problem, and he only sees numbers, codes. So we need to improve that knowledge. Please, if you want to add something.
I'm sorry, I'm running away. I don't want to take this discussion over, but funny enough, when you work with law enforcement on any legal projects, right, on any law project on the international level, you go to law enforcement, and the main guy who is talking to you is actually a technical guy, but who happened to know kind of law, you know, so he knows how to operate technology in this legal environment. It's interesting. I totally agree with you. And about ecosystem, you know, there was a book of Victor Hugo, you know, the Man Who Laughs. So they stole children and they made them comprachicos. They put them, you know, into strange conditions when children grew into like totally ugly people. When we compare these to ecosystem, to organic development and so on, we might and then have these kind of comprachicos, you know, which didn't grow well because we put some constraints, because we didn't pay attention to some things in the beginning. So while we do have to allow it to develop organically, there is still a lot to do in terms of proper development.
Thank you, Tatiana. We understand you have to leave for another session, but I hope we can continue this discussion at some time. We have a remote participation, so I will open the floor there.
My name is Theo Chino in the United States, where I follow how law enforcement hides behind the court and disguises the lack of technical knowledge of the courts to get warrants. The problem is that the court is not interested in joining technical talks, at least in the US. This was a reaction to the last person's comment.
Thank you for our remote participants, and they are invited to participate. So if you, I don't know, Kai, Duncan, or Michael, do you want to make any remark, or we go again to the delegates?
If I may just make another remark.
Yes, just after the gentleman, please.
Yes, I would like to do some remarks because we had a lot of points already raised which haven't been finally discussed. First of all, I totally agree what was mentioned before, that we should really separate targeted surveillance versus mass surveillance. This is definitely something. I think in general we are putting too many different things into the same bucket. There's a general problem, and this is caused by a lack of understanding. And honestly speaking, I'm consulting, as mentioned, companies for 20 years about the value of data. Now I'm more consulting public services about the value of data and the interest of different communities to abuse that data. And I think we need to change that. And it was mentioned before, what is cybercrime? How do you define that? For me, it's pretty simple. For me, it's data abuse. It's really using the data against us or for purposes which we didn't agree on. Michael mentioned something before, which is for me the most important thing, talking about security. It's trust. And I think that's the key thing when also, like in the consulting area, I'm trying to sell security not as something negative to protect something, but really something positive. And moving into the analog world, it's like if you had something of good quality, it felt reliable and it trusted that it's working. And security is the same thing for me in the digital world, because if something is reliable, you trust that the information is kept, it's kind of quality, it's digital quality. And this is important to achieve. And the other thing, how to reach this trust, is for me transparency and control. And therefore, again, the point I raised at the very beginning, we need to get the control back to the individual, because the individual should decide what's happening to the data. And people who don't know the value of the data at the moment should be able to revoke that information at a later point in time, which is currently not the case. And summarizing all of that, that's why we need a paradigm change in data privacy and how we handle this, and that's what I'm working on.
Okay, so now I pass the to the gentleman who wants to make a remark.
Yes, that was sorry. Excuse me for the setup, but that was a remark regarding the US. So the US actually, the DOJ, Mr. Rosenstein made a very good article regarding his position at the Naval Academy 2 months ago. I think it's worth reading. I think the US have another problem in the way they deal with the tech giants versus the operators and their various agencies, because they cannot find the compromise between, I would say, privacy and security. So unfortunately, there is no good technical answer. And until we find a good technical answer, then it's going to be difficult to reconcile the two worlds. So back to the trust and the people, I think it was said before that indeed the biggest problem we have actually is the human person in this chain. So today when you are a person and you see a problem, what do you really see? You see, oh, there is a certificate problem with the other party. Right, that's all. So people do not understand what it is. Usually they ignore the problem and they continue. So what are we really doing to give people a feel for trust, a feel for privacy, and a feel for security? Because if you are not able to put the person, and I mean every person on the planet in each of his culture and his all constituencies that makes him a persona and a digital persona, it's going to be very difficult to find an appropriate mechanism to give back trust in this world. Thank you.
Thank you. You? So, ladies first. Okay, yes, and then we go to the gentleman.
Okay. Hi, my name is Luisa. I'm a student and researcher in law philosophy at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in the southeast of Brazil. And still on this topic of trust and transparency, openness, as the title of this talk suggests, is indeed essential when we are talking about privacy and when we are talking about privacy, focusing on third parties' actions against users. But when we think about the structure that the state constructs around cybersecurity, it is very hard to talk about openness and privacy, because throughout the ages, most states have shaped their own security actions around secrecy. And I wanted to ask you if you see a way of us turning around and doing the exact opposite and constructing law enforcement security through a transparency strategy.
Thank you, Luisa. Gentleman.
Hello, my name is Saliu Mansouri. I'm from Sierra Leone. Earlier, there was a question about whether there's a government security officer here, and I raised my hand because as I work for government. A question that usually comes up at IGF regionally and also national is the one question: should a government have a kill switch? Should we? Anyone here want to answer that? Should we? Should the government be able to switch off the internet at a certain point because of security? No? Yes?
Please.
You're referring to recent activities in Africa?
Yes. Because sometimes to ensure your security, both physically as also in terms of your data or whatever other reasons, the government needs to have that power to be able to switch off and get things in control. It happened once in Liberia, next door, when we have this Internet of Things, this virus that was attacking the system openly. And the government needed to put a stop to it. But more so importantly, someone sent out a fake message during the Ebola crisis that asked people to drink salt water and wash in it. Thousands of people fell for that fake news. It could have killed a lot of people. The government had to come in and we switch off the internet, switch off WhatsApp, just to get the message out that that is a fake news. So also in terms of balancing, there has to be that amount of balancing to allow government to secure you, as well as also to secure your privacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before that, I will add, in Mexico during recent earthquake, there was a lot of fake news, and the government can do nothing because they were attending their own crisis. So who finally made the balance was the civil society, who actually start to verify information, so they have to double check and fact check. Yes, but you cannot do that every time. So I will pass the floor to the gentleman.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor again. I think I have to begin by saying that if we want to address a specific problem comprehensively, then we don't need to work in silos, particularly if you want to address this issue from an international perspective. And I wish Tatiana was still here with us, but I would like to say that during our discussions in the GGE, specific delegations tried to bring issues related to internet governance to the work, and the rest of the delegations refused, because we were working under the mandate of the First Committee of the United Nations General Assembly, and this mandate gives us only the mandate to work on issues related to security, international security. And they perceive issues related to internet governance, not as part of this mandate. The second issue I would like to address is the need to have a technical opinion in order for member states participating in such kind of forums to take an informed decision. So people who are participating in the work of GGE and addressing cybersecurity issue from an international perspective don't have the technical capability in order to take a specific decision on a specific problem. And one of the problems that was raised was attribution, as I have just said. So we need to know from a technical perspective if attribution is an easy process to do, so as to give the right to a state to use its right to self-defense according to the Charter of the United Nations to use force. And this is not an easy problem. It's a very complicated problem because it might lead to a war. And I don't need to repeat the examples that we have witnessed in the near future about the accusations or charges that were leveled against a specific state participating in the electoral process of another state. I don't want to raise it, but does this give the right, if I have a clear attribution for this state to use the right of self-defense? This is not an easy question. And the third point I would like to address is to the gentleman here. I don't really know your name.
Kai.
Kai. When he said that to him cybercrime is a data abuse, I think this is an oversimplification of the problem. In order to take a clear and an informed decision, we need to have a clear definition for such kind of issues. And these are the kinds of challenges that we are facing from an international perspective when we deal with issues like this. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. Does anyone wants to have? Please.
Thank you. Mauricio from Mexico. I'm data protection lawyer. Some comments. I think that cybercrime is, as you have mentioned, not so simple. And we are trying to move in different countries to sign the Budapest Convention in order to have some certain concepts about what is cybercrime and how to move in the net. On the other side, I agree with you about the concept of trust and privacy, because cybersecurity and the control the user has on the net will provide us more trust in our suppliers. And to the gentleman from Africa regarding how to do from the government in transparency, I think that transparency and privacy are not encountered concepts. They are complementary, because one point is access to information all the governors are obliged to provide to citizens. And the other thing, from the private perspective, is the power we all have as citizens to control our information. And that kind of privacy is not in fight with the access of information all the governments are in due to provide us. During the earthquakes, as you mentioned, civil society gave in Mexico a great example of how to manage information against the limited access the government in Mexico had. Thanks.
Thank you, Mauricio. We have a remote participant, and then we go with you and with her. Please.
Okay, this is from Asin Tungali, the session organizer. To the guy from the government who made a comment on internet shutdowns, I don't think at any time the government should shut down the internet. There's so many things, so many other ways the government can ensure people's security without interfering with their right to access the internet. There is no reason to shutting down the internet because the cost is huge and very high most of the times compared to the reason of shutting down. We have so many cases in Africa where this happened, creating more problems that they think they are saving, Yeah.
Thank you for our remote participant. I will pass the floor to the lady.
Thank you. My name is Naruga Lilian. I'm from Uganda. It's still to my brother from Sierra Leone, and I think you responded to some of his questions. This goes to mainly governments from Africa and those other governments that think that shutting down, the internet can solve a problem of false news or fake news. I'll give an example. Just this year when we anticipated an internet shutdown in Kenya because of the elections. I'm from Uganda. We experienced a shutdown, social media shutdown last year. And we also thought that Ghana would shut down, the internet, but it did not. It showed us that there are alternatives to addressing, such incidents. In Kenya, the government was able to come up and counter this sort of false information. So I think before clicking that, holding that button to click, to switch off, there have to be other alternatives to addressing different internet-related problems.
If I may just respond.
Yes.
Sorry.
We have to go to the lady and then we come back to you. Please. Oh, sorry. No, I thought. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is João Moreno. I'm a researcher at Inscript Lab in the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. I study theoretical cryptography, and on the topic of targeted surveillance, when I hear a discussion about internet security, I always hear people talking about the necessity of deeply identifying the internet users at all the time to make the user be easily tracked, and that violates privacy radically. But something that normally is forgotten is that we have more than a virtual world, that have the material world, and it's necessarily modified when someone is doing something on the internet. Having a tool that can watch every step in the internet make it possible to watch every step in the reality too. And this tool is never necessary. If you're doing something illegal in the internet, you can be caught through the unfolding of those actions. The law enforcement agencies are trained to work in the physical world, and they are good at it. They do not need this kind of surveillance tool that can easily misuse it and turn it into mass surveillance. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I pass the gentleman.
Just to respond, what I was trying to point out to was that, yes, government will look at all options, and that's what we did in the case of the Ebola fake news. We looked at all options, but my point is, if we have to save lives, and I think that government should, I'm not saying will, or government should be able to save lives, if that is the last option available. That's all I was trying to say.
Thank you. Now the gentleman, please.
My name is Mwenda Njoka. I'm from Kenya. I'm from the security sector, and also I'm a member of the regulator. I would like to respond to my sister from Uganda. Actually, in Kenya, we have a very liberal constitution that allows for freedoms. And it's true, there are people anticipating during the election, because we had a very competitive election during that period, that there would be a shutdown of internet. But because the government respects the constitution and they respect the rights of citizens, what we did was to ensure that we focused on, the internet was used by some people with ill intentions, but what we did was to focus on specific accounts. If an account is being used for certain nefarious or certain illegal activities, we focus on that and take specific action. But we didn't go we didn't go the way of a blanket shutting down, because that would have cost much more than it would have saved. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, I will go into this analogy of a house, and if I will ask who has the right to shut down the facilities inside the house. Yes, so if someone from the panel wants to participate in the next round, I will go with you first.
Yeah, I fully agree that shutting down the internet is no option, because for me it's also related to freedom of speech. On the other hand side, also companies have the same problem. They would love to shut down the internet sometimes if fake news is spread around them. The only way how to cope with this is finding the right alternatives, being prepared, and react in the appropriate manner. And shutting down is simply no option. Another point which I wanted to address, because we had some questions before, like turning around security and privacy from the current status to something else, is exactly what I'm pushing for. Is really we need to regain control, and it can't be that our data is spread around, and we have to find ways how to get it back. So therefore we need to turn around security and privacy. This is a must, and this is why I'm pushing so much that these privacy mechanisms need to be integrated in the data itself, and therefore we need a change in technology, and therefore also disagree to what was mentioned before, that there's no technical answer to balance between privacy and openness. There is an answer, but we need to get rid of these, what I call medieval technologies, which are decades old and have been built when the purpose of the internet and the data which is spreading around was completely different. During that time, not even science fiction was at the level we are now. So therefore we really need to be brave enough to change things, and therefore we need to bring together the different parties to define the right solution. And you were mentioned before, I oversimplify the cybercrime topic. I definitely did, but let's say the only way how to be able to discuss on different level topic is trying to simplify things. And I also wanted to simplify the topic today now, and talking about openness, because openness means for me trust, and trust means for me transparency, and openness could also mean that we have a controlled access to the data. And I think, as Tatiana was mentioning before, we have the rules in place, but let's say the problem for me is really that the rules are not followed, the information is abused, and we need to simplify things to at least understand the big problems which we have and find the solutions for those.
Thank you, Kai. Duncan.
Actually, the gentleman there, he wanted to speak.
So, okay, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much for giving me this enough time and space. My name is Ernest. I represent Freedom House delegation here at the event. My point is that internet remains almost the only environment when you can find a lot of independent information, and you can handle it, and you can not only help and save lives. The problem is that you cannot block the access to internet, as soon as it's the only environment when people can feel themselves free there. And the government is very limited in helping people, in saving lives, by just blocking the access to the only source of information and the environment of freedom. Another thing is that you rather respect and educate people and teach them how to feel free, to be free, and to respect each other, rather than just being like a father caring about your chicks. So the matter is that blocking the access to internet would harm both the government, the people, and the whole understanding of how to use the independent information for your sake. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Duncan.
Yes, thank you. It's been a very rich discussion, so I'm going to focus on a couple of broad points, I think, rather than anything specific. One I wanted to highlight in listening to the discussion is the diversity of the different situations that we're describing. I mean, we've talked about the situation in Africa, and I think in the Asia-Pacific region, again, you can see great diversity in how the internet, privacy and security are considered, and it makes it a real challenge to look at this discussion and try to find a strategy or ways to improve what we're talking about. I mean, to give you two examples, for those of you who are familiar with Myanmar and the connectivity that has come to that country in the last few years, and how the population of Myanmar has taken to the use of Facebook, I think you can safely say, like no other economy on the planet, Facebook is adopted there through more than 90%. And in a way that when you talk to the people there, it's a very positive tool. And they use it from everything for women exchanging health advice and information and having discussion groups, to obviously business platforms, to everything many of us use Facebook for, the sharing of personal information, the connecting of friends. But to anyone standing outside of Myanmar and looking how that economy and that culture has so rapidly and so widely adopted Facebook, I think some people would look at that and have some concerns and say, how is Myanmar looking at the use of that platform so widely in its community and its culture? Another example that comes to mind in listening to the discussion of some of you, I'm sure, have read the articles about the experiments in China with the social credit system, and how that is being used. And just recently I read, I think it was in Wired magazine, where the interviews with people in China using the social credit system were actually quite positive. One gentleman who was interviewed was hoping to get a visa, I think, to come to Europe, a Schengen. He had enough social credit points under the system to achieve that and was speaking quite favourably. Now, I'm in no way doing any judgment here, but I just put it out there as examples of the diversity of the cultures and the impact and how different cultures look at these things. The last one that I'd mention is an area that we work very closely in the Pacific, which has had connectivity through satellites for some time. It's expensive, it's not particularly rapid, but now the big development agencies, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, are investing heavily in submarine cables to the Pacific Islands. And it's a real game changer to introduce that level of connectivity and bandwidth into small communities. By any development standard, it's a very positive thing. But to introduce great connectivity into small island communities where they've gone from having almost no access or very limited access to great access brings many challenges. And one of the first ones is security. And this would be my last point. The really crucial role of capacity building, training and education in all of these discussions. I think all of us assume a certain level of knowledge as we have these discussions, but by looking at these different communities, you can see that the need for education, capacity building, awareness is really fundamental if we're going to move ahead in many of the areas that we're discussing.
Thank you. You wanted to add something, Michael? Does anybody wants to add something? Yes, there is a participation from the lady.
Hi, I already introduced myself. I was thinking, it was very interesting what everyone said, but thinking from what interested me personally is everyone talked much about trust. And I deal with misuse of personal information given by people we know, or in cases when somebody exposes you online or tries to, at least. So for me, we've been talking about state, law enforcement, companies, and internet providers. But some things remain very unclear and abstract, such as what is privacy? I come from a country in which privacy is one of the constitutional rights, but no law enforcer or almost no one has any idea what privacy actually means, then what it means online privacy. So this is just some of the questions that I have. I don't expect an answer, just to contribute to thinking.
Thank you. As we are getting close to the end of the session, I will ask my colleagues on the panel to please make a 3-minute or less summary of what we have discussed and what is the challenge? What should be working for the next months in this discussion? Thank you. You can start, Michael, please.
So I guess one of my kind of summary or thesis points is that when it comes to this debate or this discussion about privacy and security and openness, it needs to be a holistic discussion. The people, all the different actors that are involved in this discussion need to be together. They all need to be contributing to that discussion, and there needs to be trust being built between them. One key point, and I'm glad that, Duncan, you brought this up, is that especially when it comes to individual citizens and individual internet end users, the importance of digital literacy and of, as someone said, data literacy, I absolutely agree with that. People, we are also responsible for our own privacy in a certain sense. And I think that is really a key point going forward. And lastly, I mean, collaboration is really key in this regard. And if I just wrote this down earlier. I said, if you take anything kind of from this discussion, I really encourage everyone to, in the interest of collaboration and in the interest of trust building, to really don't demonize or vilify, especially law enforcement agencies, since they, a lot of times many times, they're not just really the enforcement arm of Big Brother. There are significant issues at hand. However, but that is also the role of citizen oversight to say, well, and also, like I said, the role of transparency to say, well, where is the government specifically, or security services, et cetera, or even intermediaries acting on behalf of the people that they use versus not.
Thank you very much, Michael. I will pass Duncan. Okay.
I'll be very brief. I think my take home from this discussion and being aware is know your communities, know your forums. There's a lot of discussion going on in this area. IGF is a really important forum, but there are several other really important forums, and I would encourage, obviously the technical community has its forums. If you're not participating, really encourage you to be involved in those. Law enforcement, we've mentioned already, but I think it's really key that people recognise that there are some really important discussions ongoing already, and we go out and find them and connect to them.
Thank you, Duncan. Kai, please.
Okay, that's me. Just following the point, what is privacy? For me, privacy is that I control what has been shared about myself, and that I be able to revoke information if I did a mistake. Especially if people are not educated properly, they need to be able to revoke information. And therefore, what we need to change is we need to fundamentally change the way how we handle data. At the moment, we need to get rid of outdated technologies to be able to revoke data and control data. And that's what it's my aim, and I'm happy to share it with everyone.
Thank you. And final reflection is privacy used to be a matter of a door closed, and now has become very complex. And I invite everyone, as Duncan said, we need to have a constant dialogue among all the ecosystem. That's the only way we will create trust. And I invite you, if there is no sensible activity in your area, to start one. Everybody gets benefit from dialogue. So thank you very much for attending this session. Now we're closing. Thank you, the panelists. Good day.